Hi, it's Katie, and today I'm going to show you how to make sourdough flour tortillas. The night before I'm going to make my tortillas, I'm going to build up my sourdough starter. That's just to feed it so that it's nice and active, as well as to make a little bit more. I only keep about a half a cup in my refrigerator, so usually when I bake, I just go ahead and build it up. I'm going to put in my container 150 grams of flour. So that's about a cup, and I'm using all-purpose flour. I want to make these tortillas half whole wheat, half all-purpose flour, so I'm just going to start with all-purpose flour, and then when I add the flour tomorrow it will be whole wheat. So 150 grams of flour, and I'm going to add 150 grams of filtered water. So 150 grams of water is about 3/4 of a cup. If you don't have a scale, you can just use those approximations. So a cup of flour, 3/4 of a cup of water, and a half a cup of starter. We're going to add more flour and other ingredients tomorrow, so we can just adjust the amount of flour and water and get the perfect consistency tomorrow. So if your starter is a little bit runnier, or like I said, if you can't measure precisely, it'll be okay. We can fix it tomorrow. So I'm just going to mix these together so that it's all homogeneous, no dry patches. It looks like that right now. I'm going to go ahead and cover this, and what I do is I put my lid back on this so it doesn't dry out in my little starter jar, and I put that right on top. That way I don't forget to take my starter out tomorrow so that I can bake again another day. So I put a half a cup of starter in. I'm going to take out a half a cup of starter. So we'll just set this aside and we'll come back to it in the morning. Okay, so the next morning it is puffed up and has lots of bubbles. You can see all these bubbles all throughout. So it's very active. I'm going to stir it down just a little bit, and first things first, I'm going to take my half cup starter back out and save for the next time I want to bake. Okay, so this will go back in the refrigerator, and what we have left should be about a cup, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less. That should be fine as long as it's close to a cup. And we're going to use this to make our tortilla dough. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt. So half a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of oil. I'm using grapeseed oil. I've also used olive oil. I've also used chicken schmaltz, and I've also used lard. They all work. You could probably use coconut oil, tallow, vegetable oil, whatever you want to use. If you're using a solid oil and you want to warm it to sort of liquefy it, just make sure that you're not heating it so much that it'll kill your yeast. Alright, so I'm just mixing those sort of flavor ingredients in. And now I'm going to slowly mix in another cup of flour. This is whole wheat flour, so I used all-purpose flour last night, and so this is another cup of whole wheat. So about 50-50 blend these tortillas are going to be. And I'm just going to mix it in. You want to add enough to get a sort of stiff dough. You want it to be stiffer than bread dough, but not too hard. And as this sits and rests and sours, it will loosen up. The flour will hydrate with the water, it will relax. So you're just probably going to add most of this cup, but it just depends on how wet and runny your starter was, and your humidity, and how precisely you measured your ingredients last night. So just add a little bit at a time. I'm going to start with this spoon until it sort of comes together, and then I'll go ahead and knead it by hand. And you don't really need to knead it to form gluten like you would with a raised loaf. You're just going to knead it to basically mix the flour in. And it should end up relatively smooth and elastic just from how much kneading it takes to mix in this flour. I'm going to go ahead and switch to using my hands. Alright, so I have probably enough flour mixed in. I do have a little bit left in this cup, probably about 2 tablespoons of flour left. But my dough is just a little bit stiffer than bread dough. And if I need to add a little bit of flour later on, I can do that too, so don't worry about it too much. I'm just going to make a ball, stick it back in my container, and just put like a drop of oil to coat the dough ball just so it doesn't dry out. And I'm just going to let this sit on my counter again, cover with the same cover, and you can rest it for 3 or 4 hours and make them right away, or you can put it in the refrigerator and let this dough rest for up to 24 hours, maybe even longer. The longer that it sits, the more the sourdough flavor is going to come through, so it's going to get sour, more and more sour. I'm probably going to make these in about maybe 5 or 6 hours, so I'll come back and show you what it looks like then. It's been about 7 hours. And that's what my dough ball looks like. It's puffed up. It's probably at least doubled in size. And I'm going to go ahead and divide it into equal portions, roll them out, and grill them on a grill pan. I like to make my each tortilla, I like to use 50 grams of dough. That works out best for what we use them for. Also fits my griddle really nicely. So I use a kitchen scale, but you could just pinch off equal portions. So that's about 50 grams, probably about the size of a golf ball. You can make these bigger or smaller, however you want your tortillas, but just like I said, 50 grams makes about an 8 or 9 inch tortilla, which is really easy to wrap everything up in, and it also, like I said, it's not too big that it fits my griddle really nicely. If you wanted to, you could just take your dough and divide it evenly into 8 or 10 pieces. Alright, so I actually got 8 dough balls, and I'm going to just make little round balls like that. I just make my middle finger and my thumb into a circle, and I kind of press it through, and it makes a nice round ball with a nice smooth tight skin. And then I'm going to flatten it out with my fingers and kind of pull and stretch and squish to make a flat disc that's probably about 3 or 4 inches across. I just do this to sort of start it out in a nice perfect circle, so when I roll it with my rolling pin, it's more likely to stay in a circle. And then I'm going to stick it underneath this Silpat just to keep them from drying out. You could just use a piece of plastic wrap or a damp tea towel too if you wanted to use that. You just want to make sure while I'm rolling these out and cooking them, you don't want them to dry out. You want the dough balls to stay nice and moist. First thing I'm going to do is preheat my griddle. I use a cast iron griddle. You could use a cast iron frying pan. But what you want to make sure, if you're using cast iron, you need to preheat it. We're only going to cook these on sort of a medium-low. I set my stove to a 3. My electric stove is set as a 3. But you want to give your cast iron a good 8 to 10 minutes to preheat. If you're using Teflon or another nonstick, then you just need to preheat it for 30 seconds to a minute. But with cast iron, go ahead and do that first, and then you can roll out your tortillas, and then it'll be nicely preheated. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and roll these out. And I'm going to use just a little bit of flour. You want to make sure that they don't stick to the countertop or your rolling pin. So I'm just going to use, that's the last little bit of that flour. So mine is whole wheat. You can use whatever flour you want. And I'm going to roll these out. And you want to roll them pretty thin. And if they stick to the counter or the rolling pin, then when they're so thin, it's really hard to peel them up from the countertop. So you want to make sure you have enough flour that they don't stick too bad. You don't want to use too much flour though, just enough so they don't stick. You can put it on your rolling pin or on your hands, or just a little bit on the counter. And what I have found to get nice round tortillas is you don't want to stretch it in any one direction too much at any one time. So go just a little bit at a time, turn it about a 1/6 of a turn, roll it a little bit more, turn it another 1/6 of a turn, and you're going to repeat that plenty of times. You want to roll this out sort of gradually. And because this dough has rested and has just been sitting there souring for hours and hours, it's nice and relaxed, so it shouldn't spring back on you too much. So when you roll it out, it should stay in that size that you roll out. So I'm just going to go ahead and gradually roll these out. And I like to try to keep them into circles whenever I can, but if they don't end up as circles, that's not really a big deal. Actually, more of like an oval shape I think is easier to wrap things up in, but I'll go ahead and aim for nice pretty circle tortillas. Alright, so I'm going to just set this to the side. I'm going to roll a few more just to get a head start. Okay, so these end up about 8 inches across. If you can see the thickness there. Basically, you want to roll them as thin as you can while still being able to handle them and hold them without adding too much flour. If you need to, go ahead and roll them all out first and then grill them all up at first or at the same time. That's fine too. I don't have any oil on my griddle. It's dry. There is a residual oil from last time I cleaned it. I oiled it, but I didn't add any oil, so it's a nice dry skillet. And I'm going to take my first tortilla and just drape it onto the griddle. And it only takes about 30 to 45 seconds. Should get bubbles all over the top, and you want the underside to have just little spots of a golden brown color. You don't want it to cook too much or else it'll get hard and crispy. You want to still keep it nice and pliable. Okay, so after about 30 seconds you can give it a little peek and then just flip it over. And that's what you should see, just little spots of brown. You don't want the whole thing brown, you want just little spots, and you don't want them to be too dark brown. When your tortillas are finished, I just have a plate with a clean lint-free kitchen towel. I'm going to take it off of the pan and put it in the towel, wrap it up, and then when the next one comes off, I'll open it up, put the next one in. But you want to keep them covered, that way the heat from all of the tortillas kind of steams them and keeps them pliable. I'm just going to set that to the side. Go ahead and grill up my next tortilla. So go ahead and flip it, and I usually press out the bigger bubbles. You probably don't have to. It's just a little game I play. Right. Open up the towel, throw the next one in, close the towel, and then the next one goes on the griddle. And you just repeat this process until all your tortillas are grilled. Alright, so the tortillas are done. They're still warm and super delicious. They smell amazing, and they're ready to wrap up whatever you want to wrap up. Honestly, my family eats them a lot of times just like this as a snack. They're so delicious on their own. If you're going to use them right away, then just serve them as is. If you're going to save them for later, I would keep them wrapped up in the towel until they cool off. That way they don't dry out. And then once they're fully cool, you can transfer them into like a plastic Ziploc bag and put them in the refrigerator. And then when you go to use them, you can just warm them up on the griddle again for just a few seconds, or you can even microwave them for like 5 or 10 seconds. And then they'll be nice and soft and pliable and perfect for whatever you want to wrap up. If you liked my video and recipe, please give my video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. And subscribe if you want to join in on the fun with all of my sourdough, fermenting, cooking, crafting, gardening, grocery haul adventures. Just hit the subscribe button below. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.